I had a fantastic conversation this week with a friend and colleague who is an American accent specialist and English teacher. I wanted to invite Jesus onto my channel to talk a bit about his experience because Jesus is not a native English speaker. You might be shocked by this when you hear him speaking because his level of English is fantastic. He uses idioms and phrases and metaphors in exactly the same way a native English speaker would. He sounds so confident and natural and fluent when he speaks. But at some point in his life, he had zero knowledge of the English language. So I think today in this video, not only will you get to test your advanced English listening skills, but you will hear from someone who has been in exactly the same position as you. They were overwhelmed by the amount of English they had to learn. They were scared to speak to native English speakers. They were nervous that they would get something wrong. But now, when you watch the interview with Jesus, you will see that for anyone that is determined, motivated, and wants to speak English well, you really can achieve those fluent C1, C2 levels of the English language. If this is your first time seeing me or this channel, be sure to subscribe. I teach intermediate to advanced level English, and there is a lot of fantastic content on this channel to help you reach that next step on your English language learning journey. So without much more of me talking, let's allow Jesus to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jesus Flores, and I just recently joined the English CAD team. I'm 34 years old, and I live in the United States, but I'm originally from Colombia in South America. My native language is Spanish, but I'm also an English teacher, and I trained to be one. And I'm hoping to share some good insights, ideas for you to think about, give you some food for thought.
I think it's a fantastic opportunity for students to hear from you, to listen to you speak and hear your tips and your tricks for the English language. Because whilst teachers can give this information to their students, most native English speakers don't have to actively learn English. They just learn it as a baby, as a child. So hearing from you, someone who knows exactly how it feels to have no knowledge of English and now speaks fluently and clearly, it is going to give a lot of inspiration to students.
Agree. Yes. I firmly believe that there's a place for both the native and non-native teacher, tutor, trainer. And we both have things to bring to the table.
So our first question today is, and this one is very popular with my students, it's about vocabulary. A lot of people get to a point where they are at a stalemate. They have all the vocabulary that they use on a daily basis, that they actively use, and they find it very difficult to add more vocabulary, or when they do add more vocabulary, they forget it very quickly. You have a fantastic vocabulary range, Jesus. So I would like to ask you, can you introduce a few techniques you used to improve and broaden your vocabulary?
All right. So the first thing I want to say there is that we have to have an expectation or clear expectations regarding the knowledge of the vocabulary that you wish to acquire and what that means. And basically, as you alluded to, we make commonly a distinction between your active and passive vocabulary. One of the first things I would say there is that you need to be prepared to understand that you're going to be able to have a working knowledge of many more words than what you actually use. That seems to be a pretty well established, I'm going to say, fact in language learning. We can understand far more than we can produce. So I would say that's the very first thing to keep in mind. Then after that, how do you get this into your active vocabulary? I found some really good ways to do this way back in the day in my language learning journey. And very specifically, just to proffer this as an example, I liked anime for a lot of years, and I found the English language dubs of the shows. I use that as a way to extract useful what I thought to be useful vocabulary, and I was getting it from a medium or from something that I enjoyed. It wasn't just that. There was more to it. I collected these things. I wrote example sentences down, and some years ago, and I would strongly recommend that some people do this now. I took some of those and I recorded them basically in front of a webcam as we are doing now, and I went through these things. Take that for what it's worth. I believe that having it in different media also help with the retention of it. And again, this is something that I enjoyed doing, and so there was a very, strong element of, of motivation there, and so I really believe that that also helped that stick. So think of that when you are trying to do this. You need to ideally draw that vocabulary from sources that you enjoy or activities that you are personally invested in. For me, that used to be anime, and it worked beautifully for me. I believe that doing this was one of the things that really helped to push me over the intermediate levels into the more advanced proficiency ones. I truly believe, looking back, that that was a pivotal moment in my language learning journey. One other tip there is that you really have to do something different, or you really have to do something productive with these things. Don't just write things down or keep like a deck of like a million cards. You need to do something with it. So record it, write out dialogues, maybe even record videos of yourself, going over these things. All of those are very helpful. I used to be like most people. I would cringe at the idea of having to record myself, just doing something productive with these words and phrases. But now I've completely changed my tune there. And the very last thing I'm going to say about vocab is that you have to also be aware that this needs constant recycling. There are going to be a whole lot more words that you can recognize than you can use actively. I think that's always going to be a thing. There's always going to be that discrepancy, and you have to be ready to accept that. That's what I would say.
I think that's fantastic advice because two main points really that I would take away from what you said. The first is being prepared to use examples that are actually relevant to your life. As you mentioned, you like anime, so watching anime, reading books, watching shows that you like. There's no point learning 20 synonyms for the word fantastic when you're only going to remember 5 of them. The second point I think you made that is very helpful and comforting to a lot of people, a lot of students watching, is that you will always know more than you use. Now, this is very interesting to me because I've never thought about this before. But you're right, of course. We know more than we actually talk about or discuss, probably because we don't have the opportunity to. So I think what you said there about accepting that you will always know more than you can actually use is a really good point. So moving on then, our second question. What did you personally find the hardest about learning English to the fluent C1, C2 level that you have? And how did you overcome that difficult point?
I did a lot of thinking on this point. The easiest, let's say, example for me is that in general, listening was a skill that took a long time to develop, but I believe in my own history that there was a very clear moment when I made the breakthrough. This also has to do with anime dubbed in English, coupled with the beginning of my pronunciation accent modification journey. And I have a very clear example in my mind that I've referred to in other interviews here on YouTube. And that is that when I was 15, 16 years old, I remember that some of the TV service providers had some, maybe 3 or 4, international TV channels. It was primarily news, news outlets. One of those was CNN. And interestingly, I remember that they used to have a British anchor at some point. Every once in a while, I would tune in and I was completely lost. That was a big challenge. I understood probably maybe 30 or 40%. When I started this accent modification journey and understanding all the nuances of spoken English. That unlocked basically this whole mystery for me. Once I was able to hear all the sounds, hear all the rhythms and intonations and all that jazz, everything really fell into place. The English dub anime also helped because it was confirmation that this is the way that people use English. Now, obviously, I'm referring to American English, but there's a lot of similarities here, a lot of overlap when it comes to some pronunciation features. And that basically was the thing that did the trick. Some years after I started, maybe a year after I started my pronunciation training, I was able to follow the newscast perfectly well. I understood everything. So it was those two things. Listening in general was very difficult. And then this pronunciation plus intensive listening also as well. That's it. That's the thing that, um, again, did the trick for me.
It sounds to me like you overcame it just with practice, right? Practice was the main thing that you focused on. In different forms, of course, practicing listening, reading, speaking. I think you raised a really good point there as well, that you learn English in a particular way. You either have a British English teacher or an American English teacher, or perhaps Australian, Canadian. So when you hear that other accent, that other pronunciation of the English, it can be quite shocking, maybe. It can be quite difficult because it's not how you learned it.
That is true. There's that unfamiliarity with some accents that also adds to the uh, challenge. It really does. To this day, there are some accents that I still find quite hard to follow. And I'll be honest, I'll need subtitles, when that happens. I do need them when that happens. I can get the gist of it, but I'll miss a lot of details unless I have the words in front of me. And I guess just one other point that I had written down here is that listening is difficult for a lot of people because we have learned primarily through our eyes instead of through our ears. So there's that there. And most adults, I guess using myself as an example, or that have been through regular school systems, we've learned in that way.
Yes, exactly. I think that's why YouTube is such a fantastic resource to use because you can find any content. It doesn't have to be English teaching, it doesn't have to be a teacher. It could be someone reviewing anime. It could be somebody showing you how to garden. It could be somebody teaching you how to roller skate. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you are listening in English, you're more likely to take that information in because it's a topic you like and a topic you have chosen rather than a topic your English teacher has chosen for you.
Absolutely. Yes. That involvement, that goes a long way in your success. It really does.
So, our final question for you today, Jesus, is you mentioned you have lived in America for the last 9 years. You've also worked in America and are currently working in America. And I think that's quite a challenge to work in a second language. It must have been a really good way to immerse yourself in the language. But how did you get past that feeling of, what if I say something wrong? What if I go to a restaurant and order something and they don't understand me? What if I answer the phone at work and the person on the other end speaks too fast? How did you overcome that fear, that lack of self-confidence? How did you force yourself to go out and start speaking?
I did a lot of thinking on this one too. I believe that I was already quite fluent before I came to live in the US. So I did not really experience what you are alluding to. Some of the, let's say, more typical or expected challenges of, you know, putting down roots in a different country. That did not really happen to me. But what I will say is that living in the country where the language is spoken definitely has some good things to it. And I have two phrases here that I wrote down, and I'm going to see if I can expand on these. briefly. I see that as a supportive ecosystem and also as a form of permanent scaffolding. Now, when I say ecosystem, I mean that all of the different aspects of communal life are happening in one common language. You see the street signs in English, you see storefront signs in English. The majority of services, public services, are going to be offered, administered, run in that one language, in English in this case. And so you always have access to some form or some element of the language. It really is always there. And the scaffolding part really goes with that as well. You're going to see some high frequency words. You see these things all the time. That's as far as, let's say, the good things, the positive things are concerned. The the other side of the coin for me here is that I happen to live in a place in the United States where I could be in relative isolation from everybody. I'm going to say that in general, Americans in places like where I live, relatively small cities, we really keep to ourselves and we're not that really, let's say, actively involved in our neighbors' lives. Like, for instance, I don't know my neighbors at all. And that's a very common American experience. I'm going to say in these like smaller cities. So it is true that I have native speakers around me, but they're not as accessible as you may think they are. And one other example that I would like to mention here is that the very first time that I visited this country before I came to live here was all the way back in 2013. And I went to Texas to attend a teachers conference. And I was there for, I, I think it was 10 or 11 days. And I happened to be in a part of Texas in the city of Dallas where there was a whole lot more Spanish spoken than I thought. And I was shocked. In a way, I felt kind of, um, I'm going to say that I felt somewhat cheated because I thought, wait a minute, I've been dreaming of visiting the United States for many, many, many years. I used to be obsessed over the idea of one day being able to come here and visit. And one of the reasons why that was a big thing for me was because I was under the expectation that I'm going to be there and I'm going to be breathing and, just breathing and, living and breathing, English only. So this was a shock for me. It kind of like made me do a double take in a way. This is not as, let's say, as easy as, well, it's an English speaking country. But yes, I do believe that there's some good things about living in the country where the language is spoken. Maybe it is better in some other places where you're going to have higher concentrations of native speakers. But at least where I am right now, my environment is if anything, those two things. It's a supportive ecosystem and it's a permanent scaffolding. There are some things that I see all the time that I will never forget. There's no way that I can forget about some of these things. But there's some um, there's some nuance there, and so it's not an unqualified good.
I really liked the two expressions you used there because one is saying, be proud of how far you've come. But the other is saying there's always work to be done. There's always improvements. There's always something to learn. And I think that's very important in any aspect of our life, not just our language skills.
Yes, and so I guess for other people that will go through, let's say, that discomfort of being in a different setting, different language, the basic advice is one that I heard myself, and that is that they have to be willing to take the risk. They have to put themselves out there and they will have to put themselves in situations where they will feel rather uncomfortable. That for me, that happened when I was still living in Colombia, not here, really. Again, I thought that I was already quite ready.
My final question today, I did not prepare you for because I wanted your genuine reaction. Which is the better language? American English or British English?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm biased because I'm going to say America all the way. I would say that obviously there's not going to be a form of the language that is inherently superior to the other. I think that's clear. For me, it was a very simple choice to make because geographical and also, I would say, uh, cultural proximity to the United States. I believe that looking at my own native culture and what we have here in America, there are a lot of similarities. And so naturally, I would gravitate towards American English. I do like some things about British English. I find some of your slang very colorful and some of your expressions quite baffling at times. And I like that challenge. I know some things, but I like the idea of learning, picking up some new things here and there. If anything, it's more knowledge that I can share with a prospective student and tell them, look, I believe that Brits and Americans, we can understand each other quite well. The if there's ever a breakdown in communication, um, I think that that can be easily overcome. That can be repaired quite quickly.
Yes, exactly. American English is much more widely spoken than we think it is. Pop music, movies, TV shows, they will all use American slang, American terminology. Even British singers will sing with an American accent. So you are more likely to come across American English in your daily life than you are British English. But a lot of education systems teach British English. So I always say to my students, it depends what you want. Do you want to go out and speak to as many people as possible? Do you want to travel with your English language skills? Or do you want to have more knowledge and study and maybe go to a university in an English speaking country? So it just depends on what you're using the English for. But I agree with you. One is not superior to the other. It just depends on what you're using the language for. And it can never be a bad thing to have an idea of how Americans would say something and how British people would say something.
I guess just to end this point here, I really like the idea of being part of the English cat because I'm one American among three Brits. I like that idea. I really like that setting.
Thank you so much for talking to me today, Jesus. I've really enjoyed this conversation and I've really enjoyed everything you've talked about. I think a lot of people will be very impressed by your level of English and feel inspired by your journey. Is there anything you would like to say before we finish today?
I hope you guys enjoyed my answers and insights. I apologize for rambling at times, but again, I hope you can take something away from this and that it will help you in your journey. And of course, why not? Shameless plug, visit theenglishcat.com.
So, as we saw just then, Jesus speaks fantastically. He has a huge vocabulary range. He can switch from casual English to more formal English very naturally. He uses phrases and idioms easily. It doesn't sound forced, and he can express himself and his thoughts very well. I want this video to be a video of inspiration, motivation, and proof that if you are determined, if you want it enough, if you practice enough, you too can be that C1, C2 fluent, near native level. If you would like a lesson with Jesus, as we mentioned in the video, he is an American accent specialist, but if you would like to talk to him about anything, he teaches general English, English for the workplace, life in America, the culture. He mentioned a bit in the video about the cultural differences. So perhaps you're thinking of studying in America or moving to America. If you would like to book a lesson with Jesus to discuss any of these things, or just simply ask him for some tips and ideas on how you can improve your English or your accent or your pronunciation, you can do so. The link will be in the description box and also in the comments. If you would like 50% off your first lesson with Jesus, the code is first lesson 1. Type this in at your checkout box and you will receive 50% off your first lesson with Jesus. Or if you would like to discuss something with me before your lesson with Jesus, you can always send me an email and I can guide you in the right direction. I really hope this video was motivating, inspirational for you. Let Jesus know what you think of his English down below. You can ask him questions if you would like to in the comments. Thank you for always supporting, for watching this video, and for being here today. And I will see you in our next video. Have a fantastic week. Goodbye.